Hey guys, it's M4J here and welcome back to Global Ventures here on Planet Coaster. Now again, I will warn you, the video will stutter periodically throughout this episode as the stream was once again quite laggy. I think I might have resolved the problem in terms of getting the game to run a bit more smoothly when I'm recording and streaming. Recording itself isn't the problem, it tends to be streaming. OBS gets a little bit funny and Twitch gets very funny about it. So we start off the episode here with me just showing off the renovations to the tower as part of City of the Future, and I'm not calling it by its official name at the moment because there's been a bit of a hiccup regarding its name. So in terms of streaming, I'm 3 weeks ahead in terms of streaming to what you guys are seeing in the videos. So there's a lot that I know has already happened that I might as well... I mean, I won't give spoilers away or anything like that, but I might as well talk about it a little bit because some of it is quite important. One of which is the tower. So in the original concept for the park, it was called Tower 16. And then when I actually went and checked the name suggestion, not the name suggestions, the name list that I had for all of the rides, Tower 42 was the number. It might have been the other way around actually. Tower 42 might have come first and then Tower 16. I think it's called Tower 16 now. But I had someone draw some logos for me a few years ago now. That shows you how long ago this park was conceived. The fact that, you know, there are logos for each ride that exists. Not all of the rides. I do still need to find someone to finish off the rest of the drawings. But to start with, there are quite a few. The tower is one of those. And on that logo, it's listed as being called Tower 49. So I've absolutely no idea what the ride is supposed to be called. It's Tower something. At this rate, I might just call it Tower X and leave it at that. So yeah, it's a little bit of a hiccup, but I will resolve it. It's not a massive deal. What you're seeing me build here is an extra block section on Raid of the Fort. Basically, the block between the second lift hill and the beginning of the dark ride element is just a little bit too long, so trains end up waiting at the top of the lift hill. And I always had it in my head that the ride would go through some kind of building whilst on the island, and it kind of makes sense to have that building surround that block break there. You can see I'm doing a little test run here. The more I ride this ride, the more I'm starting to like it. There are aspects of it that I wish I could change still, but I think in terms of tweaking, I'm pretty much done with this ride for the time being. Things like that drop from the second lift hill I thought might have been too big, but there are other kids coasters that I've seen videos of where the drop height is about the same, so I'm not too worried about that anymore. The dark ride section as well, I was a little bit worried about it, but I always compare the dark ride section to the Dragon at the Legoland parks, and you know, there's, at least with this ride, there's a little bit of a storyline going on in that you join a band of pirates that are trying to raid the fort of whatever guard that happens to be, and there's a treasure room, and there's, you know, firefights and all that kind of thing. The story isn't that fluid, but it's relatively cohesive. You kind of understand what's going on at any given time. The only thing I haven't added into the ride yet are speakers, which will play audio, you know, people's voices, so you can actually get some storyline from that as well. As I said, the more I look at this ride, the happier I am with the final result. I do add another block break in this part of the ride as well, so now there are 3 block breaks within the dark ride section, just so that the ride itself runs a little bit more smoothly, because again, there are trains that are stopping and waiting, and I could add some extra theming to the part where the train stops and have it as a deliberate stop. Even though it's not deliberate, it's because the block in front hasn't yet cleared. And I might do that in the future. If there's still a little pause, I might integrate it as part of the ride. But like I said, overall, I'm pretty happy with this. You'll see a lot of these videos now. I will start the episode by tweaking some of the roller coasters. Little tweaks here and there. Nothing massive, not huge rebuilds. You know, adding the block section to the island is probably the biggest rebuild I've done for quite some time on these existing rides. Most of the time now it's looking at new rides. Although that being said, this episode does consist of a relatively major rebuild of Heart of the Forest. That is my phone going off in the background. Let me put that on silent. Apologies for that. Not even important. So yes, Heart of the Forest has Forest Falls, and Forest Falls has for a long time now been my least favourite ride in the park because it's been very badly built, very badly executed. That changes after this episode because I actually go back and completely rebuild the first section of the ride. As you can see here, I actually fix all of the terraforming, all of the auto tunnels that had been dug. There is still a tunnel on the ride, but it's a bit more strategic now. It's not just, oh, I need to get the ride into this position for the finale drop. And you know, people in the chat, especially in the stream chat, were very, very helpful when it came to rebuilding this part of the ride. Sometimes, I think when I first built the ride, I had like 2 people in the chat, and you know, it's fun. I prefer having 2 people than no people, that's for sure. But when it comes to getting feedback on certain aspects of ride building, it's nice to have a group collective and everyone offering opinions, because then you can build something that is actually the best of everyone's wishes. And that's what we did here with Forest Falls. So we had lots of people offering feedback, and we ended up building something that was a lot better than what we originally had. And when I say a lot better than what we originally had, you know, that's an understatement. It was so much better than what we originally had. It's a completely different ride now. It combines the aspects nicely of a water ride and a roller coaster, and it has a lot more interaction with Wildwood as well. So you can see here the original end of the first lift hill has been kept. The curve round to the right as well inside Wildwood's track has also been kept, but here it meanders a little bit more as a water ride. You can see, you know, there's a block section there, and it goes up into a second lift hill. Now, I imagine when I upload the POV of this ride to YouTube, there will be a lot of people saying, oh, the first half of the ride's too boring. But actually, if you go and look at real-life examples of this type of ride, this is a water coaster by Mack Rides. You look at, you know, Journey to Atlantis, Atlantica, I think it's called, at Europa Park. There are loads and loads of examples that basically the ride starts off as a little river ride. You know, it's not got big drops or anything like that. It's a log flume, essentially. It acts as a water ride. And it's only when you get to the first lift hill, and even after the first lift hill sometimes, it remains as a water ride for a little bit longer. So I think in terms of keeping it realistic, I've actually done quite a good job. You can also see now that the ride is now the same height as Wildwood when it reaches the top of its second lift hill here. And again, it has a little bit of a water ride element. I think it passes over the first drop of Wildwood in the final result. Yep, there it is. And it meanders around as a river a little bit more. And then here it climbs up into another block break to separate the ride out a little bit more. I think I straighten out the final curve. Again, apologies for the video stuttering here. There we go. It goes up into a block break, and then it turns into a water coaster. So from here until that block break that you saw me build just now, before that splashdown, it's going to operate as a roller coaster. And a relatively fast one as well, actually. It's got some sweeping curves. Again, originally when I built the curves, I wasn't too happy with how they looked. I thought they looked quite unrealistic. Gave them a little bit of smoothing using the smoothing tool. Used the banked tool as well. And now I'm actually very happy with the layout. I think the layout looks very realistic. And it hugs the terrain quite nicely. So Heart of the Forest used to just have one terrain coaster. Now it technically has 2. So I'm quite happy with that. And you can see the interaction with Wildwood here as well. The way that the ride wraps around not only itself but also around the wooden coaster. That is exactly what I wanted when I was originally conceiving this area, and it's another reason why I hated the first version of the ride, because it just didn't do that. There was no, well, there was one little bit of interaction at the very start of Forest Falls, and that was it. Whereas now there's a lot more interaction, and I'm a lot happier with it. You can see here there's a couple of near-miss elements. There's a bit of an overbanked turn that goes on here as well. There's a few head chopper effects. It passes over and under itself a fair few times. This is just one example of that. You can see under here, it goes just underneath the block section, just over the top of Wildwood. And just the whole feeling of this area of the park now is so much better than it was. So much better than it was. And actually rebuilding this as well also allowed me to fix the block section problems. So the boats run relatively evenly spaced now. Just as one boat approaches the block section, the boat in front clears the block. And it just has so much better flow to it. You can see I'm just testing it there for pacing. It's also got very good pacing. Even with the sort of the airtime hills. For some reason the game doesn't register them as being airtime hills. Same with Wildwood. The game statistics claims that Wildwood only has one airtime element. Which, you know, that can't be possible considering it's got 2 double downs, a triple up. I think it's got a double up as well at one point. You know, it's got a lot more than it's giving it credit for. And this is the fastest point of Forest Falls you can see me building here. The section where it runs down to the left through a left-hander and then into a right-hand helix, and then it slowly rises up again into the block section. And you can see here I'm actually adding a block section just before the final drop as well, and that was crucial because once again from the block, sort of the mid-course break I suppose you could call it, up to the splashdown and then to the final drop was all one block, which also means from the splashdown of the final drop to the lift hill that takes you back up to the loading platform height, that was all one block. And boats would get held up there, so adding that extra block break allowed for the pacing of the boats, the separation of the boats, and the pacing of the ride. You know, it's got good pacing now, this ride. And there is one last little rebuild bit that I do. So the little drop off the brake there into the tunnel where the splashdown is, I felt like I could do a little bit better. I think it was actually because the boats were going into the brakes too fast, which told me that the brakes were actually too low. So here I raise the height of the block section, which means that you actually go up quite a steep hill to get into the block section. But something else that allowed me to do was actually have a little bit of airtime before you hit the water as well. So most of these water coasters do have this, particularly the ones that have more than one lift hill and drop. There's a section where you'll go down a big drop, you'll level out at the bottom, you'll go over a little airtime hill, and then you'll hit the water. And that's what I wanted to do on this ride as well. So you'll see in just a second I actually go and build that just before the tunnel. One of the bits of feedback I got in the chat as I was building this was it was a good idea to put the first splashdown, the first proper splashdown in a tunnel. First of all, it hides it because yes, okay, you can see the final drop from as you're loading on the ride, but as you're meandering around the water section, you might feel like it's quite a tame ride with that one big drop at the end. So to have this entire coaster section hidden from view, it's only if you're on Wildwood that you actually see the majority of this coaster section. You can see little bits of it from the bottom if you look up the hill, but again, it's not entirely clear as to what the ride actually does. You can't follow the path of the ride, and you know me by now, I like hiding certain aspects of my rides. So this was a really good example of doing that. And also putting the first splashdown in a tunnel like that. Most log flumes do this. You can see I'm just doing a quick POV here as well. Most log flumes do this at sort of seaside resorts in the UK. They actually, particularly the figure 8 log flumes, which are quite basic but quite fun. I certainly enjoy riding them. But they do this this thing where they put the drops and the splashdowns with like perspex screens either side of the actual splash. And the idea being is the boat will hit the water will get pushed outwards by the boat into the screens and deflect it back onto the boat to get the riders even more wet than they normally would. And that's what the tunnel does as well, it acts as that. Okay, in terms of the game mechanics it doesn't actually do that, but if this ride were to be built in real life, that's exactly what would happen. The water would be displaced, it would deflect back off the walls of the tunnel, back onto the boats, and drench the riders even more. So it's kind of a double whammy. And it's good, you know, I like it a lot. I think it's It's actually done really well. This is me, I think. Yeah. It takes me a couple of goes to get it right. It does take me a couple of goes. The key is really... I mean, this ride is tricky to build because you have to make the water channel the exact same height throughout. Otherwise, the boats can't travel uphill in water, and for some reason you can't make it travel downhill either. Even though the river rapids, I think it does do that. So you can see here, it was basically a case of build a little camel hill, little airtime hill, bunny hop, with a bit of a banking on it as well because of the way I had to line it up for the second channel. And I think I bury this. I'm not sure if I actually put it all underground, but I certainly, yeah, I make it with walls either side. And there you go. So now you come off the brakes, you drop down, you go over the little airtime, which I think I do rebuild again because that's not an airtime. There, that's just a double drop. So I think here, yeah, I build it with an airtime. It's a strange shape, this drop, but it does look cool when you ride it. And then I fix the terrain around it. So what we do after this, I'll start talking about that a little bit, so I'm not just sat here in silence watching the video with you guys. We start placing some rock work, and as well as the ride interacting with Wildwood, I also wanted it to interact with the scenery. So moving some of the trees out of the way here, so obviously you don't get whiplash from a branch clotheslined as you go past. But a key aspect of this element, a key aspect of this part of the park, I don't know what I'm talking about at times, I really don't. A key element of this ride and this area of the park, that's what I wanted to say, is rock work. And you know, there's a lot of Planet Coaster players that focus on rock work, and there's a lot of jokes about, oh, it's all about the rock work, but in many cases it is, really, because there's only so much that the terrain tool allows you to do on this game. And the rest of it you kind of have to make up with rock work. One thing I wish they would change with the terrain tools is the ground painting. I wish they would let you have more varieties. I think it's 8 is the maximum at the moment. Because I had to recolor the majority of the ground over in Legend of the Frontier, I've still got those colours on my terrain tool, and I can't swap them out for other ones because it actually swaps them out in game as well. So all the red rock that we've got over there, if I change that for, let's say, a snow tool, if I reload the game, all that was once red rock will now be snow, or it will default back to grass. So I have to be careful about which terrain tools I use, or which ground paint I use. Ground paint is the correct word for this. So using the rock work is actually very, very handy. It takes up a lot of sort of power, processing power of the game. The fact that it's got to load all these additional assets, and the fact they're all stacked on top of each other as well, I don't think helps. A lot of Planet Coaster YouTubers do that. They build like custom roofs. They use individual wooden planks and build roofs from that. And I do think that not only using a lot of assets, but also stacking them on top of each other like that, particularly when one is embedded within the other, I think that causes a bit of a graphics glitch, which makes the game run slower. So again, I don't think it's the number of assets. I think it's also the placing of the assets that determines whether the game runs fast or slow. And I'm going to have that problem in my game because I've got lots of rocks stacked on top of one another, which you'll see me place in a second. I've actually gone through and placed some more fir trees. Because Peak of the Rockies and Heart of the Forest are going to be right next to each other, there are going to be some meshing in terms of the trees. So Heart of the Forest is going to have some fir trees because we do have them here in the UK, not as many as Canada. And as you go over towards the Canadian area, Peak of the Rockies, the fir trees will get more and more prominent, and the rest of the trees will become less prominent. So by the time you get into Peak of the Rockies, it's pretty much all fir trees to represent Rockies. That was kind of inspired by, it's a really weird comparison to make in a series like this, but if you ever go to Green Park Tube Station in London, there's a particular corridor where the Jubilee line is at one end and the Piccadilly line is at the other end. And if you look at the tiling on the wall, at the Jubilee line end there's more silver tiles than there are blue, and then as you get down towards the Piccadilly line end there are more blue tiles than there are silver. and as you walk along the corridor you can see blue tiles get less prominent as you head towards the Jubilee line, and silver tiles get less prominent as you head towards the Piccadilly line. And that's kind of what inspired this, to be honest. And as I say, it's a really weird comparison to make, but it's a good idea, I think, to have that, so that there's a natural transition, as well as just walking, like 1 minute you're in Heart of the Forest, and then you step over a paving stone and bam, you're in Peak of the Rockies. I want there to be a natural sort of transition between the two areas as well. So the trees is a good example of that, and the rockwork will change as well, and the architecture will change. And it's the only real area of the park where I can do a natural transition, because City of the Future is a futuristic Japanese themed area, and Legend of the Frontier is an archaic Wild West themed area. You can't really transition between those two very easily, so there will kind of be a barrier of sorts between the two. I haven't quite decided what it will be yet. It'll be a building or a berm, or something like that. So you can't just walk freely. Well, you can walk freely, but you can't just stand on the boundary of the two and see both areas. There will be some kind of boundary laid out, which I haven't really put much thought into that, as you can probably tell. What I'm building here then, so I built loads of rocks around the final drop because it's supposed to look like a waterfall. And if you tune into my stream this Friday, so today as you're watching this, will hopefully try and import as many of the logos into the game as possible and start placing billboards around the certain areas of the park. And if you look at the logo for Forest Falls, it is a waterfall surrounded by trees. So I haven't put the trees into this section yet, but there is also a lot of rock work in the logo. So this is basically building the final drop, or decorating the final drop, to more resemble the logo of the ride. Otherwise it would look a bit weird when the logo is showing something completely different to what you end up actually riding. These water jets, not every coaster in the world, not every water coaster in the world has this. The Intamin Aquatrax in South Korea, I think it is, has this, the water jets running along the tracks kind of thing. I'm not sure what that does for the maintenance cost of the ride, by the way, because I imagine it causes a lot of rust and malfunction, having water running across your roller coaster track like that. But a lot of the Mack rides do actually have water jets of certain types on certain parts of the ride. Because it's a water ride, it's another way of getting people wet as they're going down the final drop. Having some little fountains spurt onto the landing area as well. I think it's a nice touch just to add this additional decoration. I was tempted to put some fountains in the water at the end. I still need to do something with that water, because I think I'm using the clear water type in this final splashdown lake, but because of the terrain color around it, it looks very murky. So hopefully adding some rock work around the edge of the water and then putting a different terrain paint on the bottom of the lake will make it look a little bit nicer. I'm not 100% sure what color would do that at this moment in time. And then here I'm starting to add the major rock work. So at this point onwards, it's pretty much rock work on this first part of the ride. And by the end of it, not only do we make Forest Falls look nicer, we actually make Wildwood look nicer as well, because there's a few rock tunnels that Wildwood now goes through, so there's a few more near-miss elements than there were previously. This part here is a very good example of that. The way I've built up the layer of rocks here, it really does look like the track for Forest Falls was built upon the rocks. Kind of like what I'll be doing with Manic Miner in the near future as well, making it look very much like Big Thunder Mountain in terms of the track sits directly on top of the rockwork. So the rockwork here has been sculpted to fit the banking of the turns of the track of Forest Falls. So here, for example, as well. And then we actually start building some rock arches over the track of Wildwood, which you can see here. And it's kind of, the interaction elements are still there, but it's designed to hide the two rides from one another, if that makes sense. So when you're on Wildwood, particularly as you enter that bank turn, you'll go through the rock arch and suddenly Forest Falls will be directly above you. And it'll be kind of a, whoa, where did that come from moment. And it's, you know, it's fairly active on this section of the ride, but the first section of the ride at the top of the lift hill of Wildwood is where this effect works best, I feel, because here we were kind of limited a little bit because we had to keep the clearance safe, obviously. So the way that the terrain was built here and the way that the two tracks pass over one another or pass under one another in the case of Wildwood, there wasn't that much room to place a huge amount of rocks. So there's a lot of gaps that still need to be filled, so I might have to go through with the terrain tool, push the terrain back a little bit, and then put some rocks in. At least with a wooden coaster, you have the advantage of the handrails either side. So you know that if the rock impedes upon the handrail, then it's not safe. So you can build rocks up to the handrail, and in some cases above the handrail, like I've done there. So the Forest Falls track still goes through quite nicely, but the two tracks are hidden from one another. And the key element of this really was hiding the trough that the water ride section of Forest Falls goes through, so that it feels like the water is actually being held back by the rocks rather than by a metal troughway. So you know, overall, like I said, I'm very happy. I'd like to put some bushes growing out of these rocks as well, so it doesn't just look clean and pristine everywhere. It's supposed to look rustic. This whole area is meant to be rustic. You know, wooden buildings that are starting to fall apart, that kind of. Well, not falling apart, but not exactly new. I do need to go and look at some Tudor style architecture, because the station buildings for Wildwood and Forest Falls have their own unique identities. In one case it's kind of like a modern wooden framework kind of building, whereas for Forest Falls it's more of a rusty old shed kind of feeling. But there are going to be other buildings around the area where, because it's an old English forest, I think using Tudor architecture would be better. So have, you know, white walls with brown wooden beams going across, that kind of thing. I think that would work best. But you can see here how the rocks are starting to hide the troughways a little bit more, a little bit better. So what I'm going to do here, guys, I'm going to leave you with the music for a little bit, because I can tell that I'm running out of things to say. It's kind of like I know what I want to say about the ride, but I'm trying to match it with the pace of the video so that I'm not giving too much away too soon. So I'm going to leave you with the music for a little bit, and we'll come back in just a second for me to round up the video and also to talk a little bit more about what you guys are seeing on screen. So as you saw from the POV there, the ride is starting to look a lot better than it was before. At the end of the ride, once it's all been themed and finished properly, the rock wall you can see on the right hand side of the screen there with all the bushes and trees growing out of it, that's basically what the rest of the rock work of the ride will look like as well. Here I'm just doing a panoramic shot of boats coming down the final drop. It's still a very tall final drop. I think I worked it out the other day as it was 101 foot tall, I think it is, which for for a roller coaster, 100 foot isn't that big, but for a water ride, 100 foot is quite a drop, particularly on a water coaster, because normally they're sort of 60 to 80 foot tall, and even then, that's only the lift hill. The final drop itself is sort of 40 to 50 foot maybe. Sometimes, particularly at Europa Park, they have a water coaster that is the full, I think that one's close to 100 foot actually, and it's just a steep drop straight down into a water pool. But water coasters, it is quite rare just to have a straightforward steep drop like that into a pool of water. So I wanted to have that as part of the signature element of the ride. Here I'm just doing a walkthrough of the tower's queue line. It will be decorated, don't worry, it won't just be white walls and looking very boring. I think here as well I was trying to do a ride through because I had some new people in the chat that hadn't seen the park before, so I was going to show off a couple of the rides. This was one of them, except for some reason the triggered effects weren't working like they were before, so I am having to go through and have a look at that and see why that's not working. I do actually at this point play the triggered effects so that you can see them all working, and it would be really annoying if I have to go and redo those because it took a long time to do. I'm also going to redecorate a lot of the rooms inside the ride, make them look a little bit more realistic, as it were, particularly that supply closet where the electricity sparks and everything are, because it's not very nice looking at the moment. But that just about does it for this episode, guys. Big thank you for watching. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and of course if you're enjoying the series. Drop some comments down below with ideas for future episodes or any feedback that you might have on the rides that you've seen so far. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button. If you have already subscribed to the channel, thank you guys for your continued support. We got a big build coming up at the start of next week's stream, I think it is. So hopefully you're all looking forward to that. And until next time, I will see you soon.